Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Press Club. My name is Poonam Sharma. I'm the founder and editor of Global Strategy and membership secretary on the board of the National Press Club. It's our great honor to welcome two distinguished guests tonight, Mr. Daniel Soyani, former Premier of Malaita Province in the Solomon Islands, and Mr. Celsus Taliflu, sorry if I mispronounced your name. He's a foreign policy expert and political advisor to former Premier Soyani. And my fellow Canadian, Ms. Cleo Pascal, who's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And also with us is our fearless moderator, Mr. Simon Kim, who's a columnist for the Sunday Guardian. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. Now, we must, first and foremost, we must thank Global Stratview for hosting this entire event. It's an honor to just stand with you in this regard, and just really, we cannot thank you enough for giving us this opportunity. We also would like to thank China Uncensored, specifically the viewers of China Uncensored, who have supported their entire trip, both financially, but also on a moral ground as well. So we thank them for that. Unfortunately, Chris Chappell and Matt and Shelley from China Uncensored couldn't join us today, but they did send a statement that they wish to be read to you all. Now, before we get there, just the basic house rules. There's going to be a few more folks trickling in. I know there's a bit of a horrific traffic out there, but it's okay. We'll let people come in. But just if you can just direct them into the seats as quickly as possible, be very highly appreciated. Another thing, we're going to follow a very interesting rule, which I think works for everybody. So if you have a question, please write it down and submit them over to me in the podium, and I will get them answered as soon as possible after we have our statements from our distinguished guests today. And just please silence your phones if you can, and if you know of anybody else coming and they're messaging you, so just let them know. Just quietly, please walk in. So thank you. So here is the National Press Club statement by Chris Chappell of China Uncensored. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has repeatedly said he is committed to taking over Taiwan by force if necessary. China's invasion of Taiwan will be even bloodier, more costly, and have wider strategic ramification than the horror that is in Ukraine. Controlling the Pacifics is an essential step in the Chinese Communist Party's pre-invasion plans. This is openly discussed in the region, including in a letter written March 9th by President David Panuelo from the Federated States of Micronesia. A key goal is putting resupply station or even a naval base in the Solomon Islands, which would allow it to cut off Australia from supplies and support from the United States. This is also the reason Japan tried to take and hold the Solomons, home to Guadalcanal in World War II. And the reason so many Americans and others fought to the death to liberate. For Xi Jinping, the use of Solomon Islands as he wants, the Chinese Communist Party has co-opted the democratic Solomon's government. The first step was getting it to switch from Taiwan to China in 2019, excuse me. Since then, the bribes, slush funds, bullying, and other illegal tactics have only intensified. It has given their puppet, the corrupt and unpopular prime minister, so much power that he has been able to postpone elections, perhaps indefinitely. The reason he used for the delay is one that should make anyone who believes in democracy shudder. Solomons is scheduled to host the Regional Pacific Games sporting events this year, and elections are expensive. So they instead put money into making sure the lawn bowls pitch is nice and tidy rather than let the people vote. And if the people don't like that, don't worry. The pro-PRC Solomon's government has signed a security agreement with China that lets them call in the People's Liberation Army to maintain social order. That same government has also purged a democratically elected official, Mr. Daniel Swidani, from his seat for refusing to recognize China's one China policy, effectively giving Beijing a veto power over who the people of Solomon Islands can choose to represent them. Why aren't you reading about this in the press in the Solomons? There are some very brave journalists there, but many are being intimidated into silence or leaving the profession. And now one of the main writers for one of the biggest papers there is, the vice president of the Solomon Islands, China Friendship Association. The CCP has actively destroyed freedom and democracy in the Solomon Islands. What's happening in the Solomon Islands is being watched across the Pacific Islands and beyond. China wants to be able to say to the leaders there and elsewhere, stick with us and we will destroy your enemies and unleash your press. Unleash your press. Unless the international press helps colleagues on the ground and starts reporting on what is going on, China will have won the second battle of Guadalcanal without the wider world realizing. And Xi Jinping will be in an even better position when he goes for the next country and next, and then finally feels he's in position to invade Taiwan. That is why China Uncensored has been covering Mr. Swidani's story from the beginning. And when there was an opportunity to bring him and his advisor, Salsis Taifilu, to DC, hundreds of China Uncensored fans joined our crowdfunding efforts on GoFundMe. In less than 24 hours, we were able to meet our $27,000 goal to cover their travel to DC and provide legal funds necessary for challenging China's influence in the courts of the Solomon Islands. However, GoFundMe refused the transfer of the money. With the money in limbo, China Uncensored paid out of pocket to cover the costs, not an easy task for a show that's frequently suppressed on YouTube. Fortunately, after mentioning to GoFundMe that we're taking to the media and to the Congressional China Committee, GoFundMe finally decided to release the funds. If the CCP can silence its critics in the Solomon Islands with impunity, who else would dare stand against them? The time to pay attention is now. If the American public and political class can understand what's happening in time, that might be the only way to prevent the fast approaching war with China. Thank you. That was the statement by the China Uncensored folks, and as you have heard, they have been generous enough to provide all the fundings and means for these two gentlemen to be here in DC. Now, before we start, I would like to also just mention a few things, a message of gratitude towards a couple of organizations and committees. We'd like to first thank the Congressional Executive Committee on China, particularly Mr. Pierre Tozzi and Representative Chris Smith's office for allowing a hearing that took place about 2 days ago at the Hill to brief Congress about what was happening in the Solomon Islands. We also like to thank the Select Committee on China, especially our Congressman Neil Dunn, as well as Congresswoman Radwagon, for also helping all of this to come into the picture by making sure that they were able to step into the U.S. soil. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ms. Cleo Pascal, from the Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, to provide context.
Thank you. Would you, our fearless leader, you want me to stand up, or can I?
You can.
Okay. So it is a huge honor to be here. Thank you very much to Poonam Sharma and the National Press Club for allowing this venue to be used, and for your interest in this case. I'll tell you a little bit how, as a journalist, I started covering it. But first, a little bit about the room that we're in. So we're in the John Cosgrove room, and you can't see it online, but there's a picture on the wall of Mr. Cosgrove and John F. Kennedy. And for those who think the Solomons is far away, John F. Kennedy's PT-109 boat was rammed by the Japanese in Solomon Islands waters, and his life was saved by two Solomon Islanders. And currently, the ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy, ambassador, his daughter, this past summer went to the Solomon Islands to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Guadalcanal. She was there with Wendy Sherman, whose father also fought in that battle. And at that commemoration, one very conspicuous absentee was the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands, Manasseh Sogavari, who we'll talk about a little bit more later. The other person in the photo here is the person who this room is named after, John Cosgrove. John Cosgrove also fought in the Pacific Theater. And in fact, he fought mostly in Okinawa on a boat, the USS Gendreau, who is named for a medic who died in the Solomon Islands in the Battle of Guadalcanal. So this is, the Solomons is, the blood of the Solomon Islands people and Americans is mixed at a very deep level of fight for freedom. And so we're extremely grateful for them to come back. In fact, Mr. Telefuni's relative fought alongside the Americans during those battles as well. And as Chris's China Uncensored statement said, this is fundamentally the second battle of Guadalcanal. This is China trying to place itself through political warfare in the same way that Japan did through kinetic warfare. I started covering this as a journalist because I heard a little over 2 years ago that the premier of Malaita province, Daniel Sudani, required medical care outside of the country, and the central government wouldn't fund it. And as a journalist, that started to make me wonder why, because it's normal protocol would be, it would be funded. So I started looking into it a little bit more. And what became apparent was they were using his access to healthcare as leverage to try to get him to buckle under Chinese pressure. His government is, if somebody knows different, I'd be really interested to know this particular piece of information. From what I know, his government was the first jurisdiction in the world to block CCP-linked businesses from operating in the province, in his jurisdiction. They blocked it through something called the Auki communique. Auki is the capital of his province. They named it after capital. And there were concerns for the environmental, social, and human rights effects of letting the CCP into the province, and including on human rights grounds, but specifically freedom of religion. Standing up to the CCP in that kind of a way was incredibly courageous and also incredibly dangerous for Beijing. So Beijing had to started a full court press to try to show that you cannot do this. Because if Daniel Sudani and his government and his people succeeded in locking out the CCP, it would set a very dangerous precedent. And the first way that they tried to do that was by using their influence in the central government to deny him access to medical care unless he let the CCP operate in his province. So you're looking at a man here who made the conscious decision that he would rather die than take Chinese money for the sake of his people. That happened in around 2012, 2021. And the Australians, we can get into it, said, you want to come to medical care for Australia? Fine, it's going to cost you $100,000 up front. This is an honest politician who earned as premier about $840 a month. There was no way he could get that money. And so the GoFundMe to fund his medical care was the first time I heard about this story. And then we started tracking it more closely. Very luckily, an Indian professor who believes in democracy and the importance of democracy got involved, heard about the story. Actually, the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, where Stephen is a columnist, a man called Professor Nalapat, MD Nalapat. He knows, he had worked very closely with the Taiwanese on developing the Indian-Taiwan relationship. He knew President Tsai personally. President Tsai's office was alerted. She got involved personally and ensured that Mr. Sudani was brought to Taiwan for the medical care that he needed. Had that not happened, Mr. Sudani might not be with us. And and that inconvenience would have been gotten rid of. That didn't mean that China stopped. If you take a look at what happened next, there were 3 motions of no confidence launched against him, completely unprecedented. About $70 million in cash was spread around in this province to try to buy parliamentary members. At the same time, federal level, there were Chinese slush fund was used to pay off 39 out of 50 members of parliament, which was enough to amend the constitution, which they used, as was mentioned in the introduction, to delay elections. So the Solomon Islands are supposed to have elections next month, as per the constitution. Chinese money facilitated the postponement of those elections, with the excuse being used that they're hosting the Pacific Games. So if you can imagine that, that Putin decided we're holding the Olympics, so we're not going to hold elections, what the international community would do in response to that, that didn't happen in the case of the Solomon Islands. There was dead silence. And in fact, when Sogavari, the prime minister, said, we don't have enough money for the games and for the election, so we're going to do the games, what the Australians said was, great, we'll give you money for the games. It was only after there was a bit of an outcry that Australia said, okay, we'll give you some money for the elections too, but at that point, we're so close to the vote for the postponement that it looked like internal interference in it, and it did not swing things. So that was kind of an example of how the Sogavari narrative has taken control over foreign policy engagement. The most recent thing that happened to Mr. Soudani, so they tried to deny him medical care. They got him out of the premiership, and just a few weeks ago, he again, if somebody has other information, I'd very much like to know it. As far as I know, he's the first person from a democratic country to have their seat taken away from them by the central government for not adhering to China's definition of the One China policy. That is explicitly written in the notice of his disqualification from the Provincial Assembly. So that effectively gives Beijing a veto over who gets to run in, who gets to represent the people of the Solomon Islands. Mr. Soudani also, if you haven't heard about his case, there's very little coverage in the Australian press, very little coverage in the New Zealand press. He's inconvenient. They tried to make him disappear. And when he was applying to come to a visa to the United States to speak at a UN conference on Indigenous guardianship of environmental resources, the US government denied him a visa. This happened about a month ago, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So this is when Congress got involved. So as was mentioned, Congressman Neil Dunn got in touch with the State Department, put a caseworker on it. And I'm just going to quickly read you what he said about Mr. Soudani. So he said, the denial of Daniel Soudani's visa application is suspicious and unusual. Mr. Soudani displayed tremendous courage in barring CCP-linked companies from his province while serving as premier. He should be welcomed to the US with open arms, not with more hurdles. That was followed by a bipartisan letter co-signed by Congressman Ed Case of Hawaii and Congresswoman Amanda Rattawagan of American Samoa, co-chairs of the Pacific Island Committee. Within a very short period of time, Mr. Soudani got his visa and is now able to be with us today. So that's just kind of a broad overview of how Chinese influence operations in one highly strategic country that has deep ties to the US has affected one man who represents resistance to those influence operations. And with that, I have the great honor of turning over to the men themselves who have been leading this courageous battle.
Thank you so much, Cleo. And before we hear from Mr. Soudani, I'd like to welcome Mr. Talifilu. Again, he's a policy expert who has spent many years in the Prime Minister's office in the Solomon Islands, and he's now acting as the political advisor to our former Premier, Daniel Soudani. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Talifilu.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure being here with you. This is something, our presence here is something we have not expected. This is beyond ourselves. I think this is the first Solomon Islanders to have ever been invited to talk in this very prestigious place as far as press, journalism, and those things are concerned. So it's been a pleasure being in the US and being invited to a number of high-level discussions regarding the issues that Cleo has made mention of. In our case, to be honest, we were so small, thinking that we were just doing something that we felt needed to be done, that our well-being, our minds, the way we think about things, and our resources, in a way would be subjected to an entity that we have heard about it mainly on a religious levels, that is an atheist thing. And it would be very difficult for us who we think we are 90%, even 99% of the country is Christian. And therefore, something of that nature would be something we pretty much afraid to deal with. Oh, we don't have the capacity, maybe we don't have the experience in terms of human resource or even in terms of our institutions. There is utterly, I suppose, very limited capacity within the institution of the state to handle any such big undertakings that China, being a powerful country with a different attitude towards development, would have put on us. As Cleo said, I have worked in Parliament close to 10 years, and then worked with the opposition office in the Solomon Islands for about 3 years. Then the last 6 years I've worked in the Prime Minister's office, first under the current Prime Minister when he was the Prime Minister, and then it got lost by almost no confidence by another Prime Minister, and then him again this time around. At the time of the current government that is still ruling the Solomon Islands, I was the coordinator of the policy think tank in the Prime Minister's office that collected the different manifestos of the, I think, 4 parties that come together to form what is now known as the DCGA, which is the, I just forgot what the acronym stands for, but that's the government. And to set the story in motion in regards to the Swedes, to be frank, we have heard about China and the Communist Party as a label of some sort in the Solomon Islands. The idea of hearing one China policy and the UN resolution, whatever that was, it was the first time for us, for me especially, to hear about when those of us who represent different political parties come together to make the manifestos into a policy statement belongs to the coalition. So I remember the second day of our gathering, one of the sort of like the politically appointed person for this this group of politicians that say that they would develop a party, and they are from one of the bigger islands, Canal. He, on the next day, when we had the first draft came out, he came and said, before we continue with anything, I would like to make an announcement. And we were like, okay, go ahead and make your announcement. And his announcement was, he said he was summoned the previous night with a strong statement that in the government policy, it has to be made clear the one China policy has to be adopted through his political masters. That is what they would like to see in the government policy at that time. So,
who is he summoned by?
This the person that is summoning the political officer from these politicians. I have named the names of the politicians. One of them is a long-time premier for Guadalcanal province, who has long relationship. Guadalcanal province actually has a long relationship with Guangdong province even before the diplomatic switch happened. So this premier, who has used to be the premier of Guadalcanal province, been elected to the national parliament, and he and the other member within Guadalcanal were the ones who said that they would have a new political party, and because of that, they would like the one China policy has to be included in the government policy that we're working on. And we were like, oh my, we are still having a Taiwan. Would this be something very, something that would not be we are putting something that might affect our friend. Taiwan is still here. Anyway, as things move along, the draft of the policies went to the caucus. In our case, in the Solomon Islands, caucus, whilst it has not been mentioned in the constitution, it's a very active institution within the Prime Minister's office, unlike the developed democracies where caucus is political parties outside of the government system. In the case of Solomon Islands, it's within the Prime Minister's office. And as one would expect, because it being the political, sort of like the political entity that where political decisions are made, in my view, is much more powerful than the cabinet. Cabinet would be seen just like a rubber stamp in our case. So when the decision was made, they came back and said, no, let's water down the wording. This is to has a policy statement to be put out there because Taiwan is still around. So the decision that was reached was to downgrade that into what they call the translation document, whereas the big statement, the policy statements as a document, that has not been featured inside. But the interesting thing in this whole thing was none of the political parties that ran in the 2019 election have ever mentioned anything about any diplomatic switch relationship. None. The political party that I was part of mentioned only that there is a need to review the Solomon Island missions in other countries to find out whether they are doing any good for the Solomon Islands or not. But that was where this group of politicians come under and say that we use this as the platform to which the new policy that talks about the one-China policy has to come under. So from then on, things were moving very, very fast. Of all the policies that the government has put in the policy statement, this particular one, the policy that talks about the UN resolution, I think it's 275 something 80. That's the one that the government has pursued very aggressively in that they have formed a bipartisan parliamentary group in parliament that made up of backbench members of the government and the opposition. And that group went out in the Pacific, sort of like on a mission to find out whether China is good, what is there for that Solomon can gain out of. And they end up in Beijing. They came by. They produced a report on their mission. From what I hear, in fact, the report was produced by someone else who has not traveled with them. So the whole thing was just, I think it's just a window dressing activity. Anyway, that's the stories that has happened when I was there. And I heard during the conversation that the current Prime Minister has had with mainly the diplomatic missions when we were there. I was there, I took minutes during his conversations with, for example, USAID, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and others. And in one particular time I remember, I think it was USAID or Peace Corps that asked him about the status of the diplomatic switch activities. And his answer was his government will only make a decision based on important reports that will be produced by different departments of the government. And he made mention of 4 reports. One has to be the one from the bipartisan group. The other one has to come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and External Trade. The third one has to come from the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And the fourth report has to come from the Foreign Relations Committee in Parliament. So that was what the current prime has been saying to friends, especially diplomats that have visited his office. But then during that week that the switch was made, we finally realized that they only rely on this report, this one report from the bipartisan group for the government to make the decision. Even the foreign affairs report that was ready at that time has never been touched or even discussed for guidance. I went to the foreign affairs minister at that time because he was in my same party and got the report, but later I found out that they have not used the report in any discussion, whether being the cabinet or caucus. So that's what's happened. I decided to left the national government, basically because what I've seen is, for me, is a very disrespectful move to get the Taiwanese out. If you are a Solomon Islander, especially if you are a Malitan, you would have known that the Taiwanese were the ones who provided what they call a bank loan to pay out the properties that was lost during what is known as ethnic crisis between people of Malay and Canal. So Taiwan during that time is the only, if not the only diplomatic mission that stick around during that crisis and are able to allow the loan to happen and participate in the government getting the funds and giving or dishing out to those that lost their properties. So in a way, they have found a way to help us in the time of a crisis. Now, what the government did for them was, as a Malitan, we would see that that's very disrespectful. You should not do that to a friend that has helped you during your hard times. That's one. And two, I left because I know that the decision was made in a way that is very dishonest and it's not transparent, because some of the key people in the country were calling for some level of engagement by the government with the people, not the outside, not in the Pacific, people at home, people in the constituencies, in the provinces or the provincial governments, but that didn't happen. So in my view, that's a very big mistake, the government to make on a big decision to twist the relationship that we have with Taiwan for, at the time it was 36 years. So it was not, and the worst part that I can remember is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Solomon Islands went to Taiwan, Taipei, a week before the switch was made. And when he was in Taipei, he was saying, there's nothing will happen. He was promising the Taiwanese that everything will be okay. And honestly, then the switch was made. So I think in my own, as a patient, as a human being, forget about the government and everything. Government should be a reflection of people and the values that people stand for and the things that people hope for. So if the institution that are created to help manage a country or run a country or govern a country has been abused by leaders who think that they are the ones that should be listened to, there has to be some accountability. They has to be accountable for what they are doing. And the best way to do that is to go back and educate the people so that the people themselves, through the normal democratic process, would have to vote them out on the next election. So that was the intentions of me coming back to my province and say, because Malay province is the province with the highest number of members in the national parliament. Our parliament is made out of 50 members. Malay province holds 14 seats in the parliament. And in most cases in Honiara, the three seats in Honiara always been occupied by Malaytans in most times. So you would see that I was hoping Malayta would be able, the people of Malay would be able to show that there is respectful way of doing things, rather than using state institutions for some gains that might not be useful for the country. So I'll stop there with the brief remarks and hope we will We'll answer some questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tarafilo. Before we move on to the former premier, if you have questions, please write them down on the notepads that are on your seats. And okay, and we will be collecting it while Mr. Sweetani is speaking towards the speech, I guess. So we'll move on to our Q&A/discussion portion. So please, if you can write down any questions that you have, much appreciated. So without further ado, please welcome this the former premier of the Malaita province, Solomon Islands, Mr. Daniel Sweetani.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. As have been alluded to, I am the former premier for the province of Malaita. Solomon Island has 9 provinces, and one of the provinces is Malaita, the most populated province, even if the population of the country is only 700,000 people. We are the most populated. So I was voted in power in 2019. We have 33 electorates in the members of the provincial assembly, all around the province of Malaita, so the highest, if I remember correctly. When we came into power, we have seen, the government executive, and we look back 40 years down the line, we have seen the development that come to Malaita has been nothing but destructive developments and exploitation of resources. So we have seen there is no hope for the people. So we come up with a idea that we should stop and have a look at how and why and where can we start with these resources that we own and it's belong to the people, and people should be meaningfully engaged with the resources they have. So we come up with what is known as the out communicate. And in the communicate, all of the other things that we've written down is all about leadership, except for 2 that really talks about the CCP. So the first one is about the ideology of religious ideology, where the Malaitans are Christian people. We believe in God, and we believe in something much bigger than the material things that the communist people believe in. So we come up with the moratorium that we don't agree on any Chinese company, any CCP related companies to come to our province. If there were any in my time that has been there before I came into power, we will find ways to remove that company out from the province. That's number 1, because of the ideology of atheists. And then we look at the logging sector. I think one of the major industries that we have in our province is the Malaysian Chinese logging industry that get logs from our land and they export direct to the Chinese market. And what really sad about these things, because we expect the national government to look at these laws, that the law that goes alongside this industry that gives 60% of the sales of log goes to the Chinese company, and the 25% of that goes to the national government or the central government, and the resource owners only take 10%. So with that, it's people, even if there's a logging industry or a development in terms of logging, when they leave the place, we only left with waters that are the environmental damage of rivers and no drinking waters. And one of the things that we have seen also, that when these loggers come into the province, they don't bring in their spouse with them. So they're ending up, the young girls marrying the loggers. They are forced, some of them are forced by luring money to them. So that is not a good thing compared to our culture as Malaitans. So that is one of the things that we, as a government, we have been seriously looking into it, and we ending up introducing a ordinance that guides the logging industry. If you come to the province, you got to pay these fees before you go to the next step. And by the time you get your license of a concession, you might pay a good number of amount of money to the province before coming in. So that's some of the things that my government actually did during our time. Now, looking further into the CCP involvement, like what we've seen as the game, they decide to think that the South Pacific game is important than election. So, but we believe that the bedrock of any nation is the election. Now, the excuse we have had that they have not have the finance to actually hold two major activities like games and the election at the same time. So they decided to extend another 7 months into the timeline for the government duration. That is, we should have, the election should have been this next month of May, but now because of they have changed the constitution, they move the election so that we have the games this year, November. So that is something sad, that the issue of games has been taken over people's rights and powers, being the people of the place, and they go for games than election. And this game is not purely for Solomon Island itself. It's a Pacific game that involves more Pacific countries to come. We've seen, for that reason, we have to extend the election. So our fight is to make sure that we have election than games. We must have the election before. The game will be there, but it must come after the election. That is our fight. And we want to see that happen, because if now in the country, you cannot speak out. Now the freedom of speech has been suppressed. You cannot talk about something that you feel is right, it's good for your people. When it's something that against the national interest that goes in line with the CCP, you will be questioned a lot for doing that. And on one stage, they think of do away with the civil society representation in the country. They want to do away. They want to just to de-release that civil societies in the country, and that is something obvious. And we feel that we are very fearful in our own country. We can speak. We can do things that's right for us. So this is something new compared to what we used to have before. So the influence at the moment is very huge. They want money to gain support from the people. Now, this one thing that is quite special with these people, they're quick to do things. And when they do that, and the people, you see, they want to see things happen, especially in terms of money. People don't have tangible development that they can look after themselves. So they depend on these kind of activities. So it's very difficult for people to say no in the community level. One other missing link that I've seen when I was in power as a premier, this linkage between the government and the people. People hardly hear anything about the government they voted to look after them. Like they stay there, they hear nothing about how the government look after them, what is all these things about the government. After the poll of the election, and that's there, it's finished. The people isolate themselves. So when these members of parliament and other cronies that came to the village level, to the people who do not know anything about the government, they quickly convince them, and they take these things that is will get the country into very chaos situation in the future. So that is what, as a government, when my government look after the province, we are so cautious about how this influence come into the province. And if we are not careful, as we have filed a case against this, the way the government has disqualified me or canceled my seat as being the member of my ward in the province, this is something I see as a test case. Like this is starting to get hold on leaders because of not respecting the one China policy. So it's something that I've seen is a very big concern for us in the future. Because once people don't get this case to court because of the lawyers' charges are very huge money. So for an ordinary citizen to take up a case to court would be very difficult. So that will keep them like even something wrong. How can we challenge it? Because the things that will give us the right to the court has been very, very expensive. So this case that I'm filing today is a test to the whole of the Pacific region, I suppose. Once they get hold of me and they win the case, that will set the precedence for the whole of Pacific region. And this is what I think is content. And they're using media. They've been using propaganda. Even if they say something that is not correct, they continue repeating it every week until people start to believe in what they say because of the fact that the government doesn't go down to people and talk about things. Solomon Island is a very small country, but the geographical locations of the island is quite expensive to move around without proper support and resources. Yes, so that's from me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Swidani. That was a very compelling speech.
Yeah, so just to reinforce some of the points that Mr. Sudani made. So he was taken out as premier, and the first thing that new parliament did was announce they were going to revoke the Auki communique, which kept CCP-linked businesses out of the province. Now, one of the things that he did while premier was the government of Solomon Islands took a $60 million plus loan from the Chinese government to put in over 160 Huawei towers into the country. And Mr. Sudani blocked those towers from being put up in his province. And from what we hear, there are now survey units going around his province, including with Chinese engineers, to figure out where they're going to put in those towers. So as soon as they got rid of it, they've started trying to figure out how to in place. The other thing that Mr. Sudani mentioned was the cost, these legal costs, these exorbitant legal costs is a barrier to justice. And we have with us Dean Baxendale, who from the China Democracy Fund, who led an effort to raise money for Anne-Marie Brady, many of you may know, who wrote excellent reports on China's influence operations in New Zealand, and whose own university tried to get rid of her. And she had to fight those costs. And the China Democracy Fund under Dean raised funds for that. And he's now announced that they're going to be opening up a new fund to help try to raise funds for Mr. Sudani's defense against the lawfare attacks against him.
Right. With that, it transitions us into a very simple question, but I believe it's shared among many Americans and the people out there. Now, with everything that you just said, why should Americans, or as a matter of fact, for the world, care about a small or relatively insignificant set of islands in the South Pacific? I mean, I guess this is the type of question that folks would be asking, especially if they don't know anything about the CCP. So,
or history.
Or
geography. Or anything else. Yeah. Yeah. Or humanity. Yeah.
Maybe I'll put it this way. Sometimes when we come from, bigger, powerful countries, we thought that our freedom is bigger than the freedom that people come from the small countries have. Freedom is freedom. It's not like something that is bigger there and small there. So when we lost the freedom of the Solomons, that's the same thing that we believe others share too. So we want to share with you that, we share the same thing that we all stood for. Please help us fight against the totalitarianism in the world. And the free world has to have this constant effort to fight against the state. That's what we believe in. So small we may be, the values, the same things, the same free will that the bigger world or the bigger democracies are aspired for. That's the same thing we aspire for too. We want democracy because democracy as a system protects our values, our traditional things, the things that matters for our lives. Communism will not do that. So we feel that is something we would like to protect. So therefore, we have to fight for it. Although we are not strong militarily, economically, but the values are just the same.
Thank you so much, and I would say amen to that. Our second question now comes with a region or a country that I guess shares a lot of what's going on with the Solomon Islands, and that is Sri Lanka. One of the questions is I have captured from my research there is a strategic trap in nations like Sri Lanka due to, number one, political funding, number two, human rights support, number three, military support. Do you see a strategic trap by China in the Solomon Islands, as well as with all the things that you mentioned regarding the logging industry? Yes, economic trap may be there. So both of you may want to touch it real quick.
Oh, apparently. Okay. So I'm picking up on the word strategic. I mean, is it clearly a strategic question? Yeah. So the first place that the Chinese tried to gain a toehold in the Solomon Islands after the switch in 2019 is an island called Tulagi. Tulagi was also the first place the Japanese attacked during World War II. And they attacked it because it was the headquarters for the British administrative seat for the region. All of those things happened because of how important that geography is. It has a deep port, it's protected, it's a good place if you care about strategic issues. And if you take a look at where Wang Yi, the former foreign minister of China, visited on his tour through the region in May, June of last year, and you take a look at the exclusive economic zones, you can see what he did was he visited a band of countries that goes right off the coast of Australia and down towards New Zealand. And it is actually the outer perimeter of where Japan tried to control during World War II. If they get control, because China does this through dual use facilities, including a fishing fleet that has the ability to shift to another mode quite easily, they're in a position to blockade or interdict Australia if they really put the effort in. And to give an idea of how poorly defended the area is, the US Coast Guard has really tried to make an effort in areas like, for example, the Northern Pacific to do monitoring. That area of the freely associated states, Palau, Micronesia, Federated States of Micronesia, and Marshall Islands, is about as big as the continental United States. And there are effectively 7 or 8 patrol boats. So if you can imagine trying to police the United States with 9 police cars that go 20 miles an hour, that's about as effective as the things like illegal fisheries is being done. I mean, there are other things also. There's, subs and satellites and that sort of thing. But the free reign that the Chinese fishing fleet has is enormous, and it is being used for strategic purpose, and it is being moved right off the coast of Australia. And they're looking at things like building more fish processing facilities in places like Solomon's, which gives more excuse to bring in container loads that can't be verified, flights that come in that can't be verified. And it's happening in Vanuatu, it's happening in PNG, Papua New Guinea, it's happening all along the whole thing. The US Coast Guard illegal fisheries cutter was blocked from entering the port of Solomon Islands. And then another one was blocked from entering into Vanuatu. They just didn't pick up the phone. And the US Coast Guard floated around as long as they could until they were almost out of fuel and then had to go to Fiji and refuel and give it up. So there's the US will go around and Australia will go, particularly Australia will go around signing pieces of paper and say, we've got this covered. We have a security arrangement. But then when you look at what's actually happening on the ground, You can see the US being blocked from ports, dual use assets being put in place, and a complete shifting, jumping of the first and second island chain, a reverse island hopping by, if you know your World War II history, by China, that is now putting it through the Solomon Islands, right off the coast of Australia, including waters that are over a lot of the cables, the undersea cables that are incredibly important for not just communications and business, but command and control.
So that leads me to my next question. I guess both of you, all three of you sort of touched on the subject, but what is China's involvement in the logging industry and police with security agreement is clearly visible? And how much has these pro-CCP policy impacted the Solomon Islands' national security? I guess this would be a question for you gentlemen.
So in terms of logging, let me put it this way. 80% of the export of Solomon Islands are predominantly logging. And the key market is China. China gets maybe 90% of the logs. India maybe to an extent, but the bulk of the logging export goes to China. So, and in the Solomon, it's obvious that the Malaysians, the Chinese Malaysians, involved a lot in the logging industry. And I can say when I was with the opposition office, when the government, at the times that there's attempts to change the government, you will see logging owners or people who own logging companies in the office. They were there typically, you know, asking for what do you want. So at the time I was there, logging plays a very pivotal role in changing the government. And that money from the logging companies is there for the politicians to use to lure people from this side to the other side and things like that. Apart from the social effects that have happened to the communities through, you know, environmental damage or things to do with teenage pregnancies, because the people, especially those who work in the local companies, end up doing those things. So, but in the bigger scheme of things, the industry, logging industry, is where the money, you know, comes to the country, and most of the money ended up in this, what in the Solomon Islands will be known as the Constituency Development Fund, that goes to members of parliament. And that's the bulk of the money that is received through the revenue that is earned through the logging industry. So you to see that that money actually played a lot in terms of creating dependency by the communities, or even creating social effects to the communities, tribes, and spoiling the environment, as in streams and waters. So that would, in a way, the money that comes through that arrangement is from China. China is the market that the money is generated through. There is this issue of what they call price, what you call it, price transferring of the logs. It's been reported by, I think, someone in the central bank in the Solomon Islands that, or those who have conducted some research, that the price that's paid in the Solomons, which is fixed by an association of the loggers, calling themselves Forest Association Solomon Islands, but they are typically the loggers, who worked with the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Solomon Islands to fix the price for the logs, not as one would have expected a price from the market, the whole market. The price is fixed by that organization, and in fact, that organization have some monopoly over who should export logs, unless you are part of that cartel, in which we believe has been nourishing a lot of members of parliament through that arrangement. Then, if you are not part of it, you will not be given the license, or there is a possibility that they will influence the responsible ministry that give the license for export of logs. So that's a powerful entity in Solomon's, not only through the logging, but through politics. They leverage a lot of effect in terms of who they want to put in in position of powers when they feel that someone is not helping them with their business, those type of business.
Well, that leads me to the next question. So the caucus that you suggested was quite powerful in the Prime Minister's office. So any of them elected in the caucus?
So the caucus in the Solomon Islands are made up of elected people and supporters of the elected people. It's like, I think it's like the caucus in the mature democracies. The difference is it's been the officials or the chairman of caucus is paid by the government. It's paid under the parliamentary entitlements. So that's like an institution that has no mention in the Constitution of Solomon and on any other law, somehow end up being paid by funds that are generated by the normal government revenue. There has been a lot of talk about taking the matter to court to find out whether it is an institution worthy of being looked after by the government in terms of the salaries and the entitlements that the chairman is always a member of government side. So if you work in Prime Minister's office, you will know that this is where most of the decisions were made when both the ministers and the backbenchers meet to discuss matters before they go up to cabinet. This is where most of the decisions have been made, so that at the political level is satisfied of the coalition that made up of the government.
So if you talked before about who is in that logging organization. Do you want to tell people who's a little bit about that, the organization that runs the logging? The forestry? Yeah, forestry.
Well, the law, the Timber Rights Acquisition Act of the forestry, the Ministry of Forestry, was made by the legislators. But there are subsidiaries that work very strong in terms of the pricing, like the Forestry Association. They are all made of Chinese. So we will hardly find what's the price is these things, because they are the ones looking after the price, and maybe the fully on board price, the Erosion price, maybe get down to 1 watt, what they want for the logs come to Solomon Islands. So it will be very difficult for any Solomon Island to get into that board to find out what actually is going, because they are all made of Asians, Malaysian Asians and some Asians. So that also a very big problem with developments in terms of logging, because the decision that always made at the committee level is made by all Chinese.
So that also leads me to our next point, which is the police agreement with China. And I know that you've
Security agreement.
security
The police one also. So I think the question about the security agreement.
Yes, correct.
So what does the security agreement allow for, and how do you think it could come into play?
Like, let me start. When we questioned the security part, I was the one questioning when I was at the Premier, and they said this security is for to look after assets that belongs to the Chinese people, and this security pack is not to operate in other areas in terms of the police. The Solomon Island police will look after. They come to look after the infrastructures of the Chinese people in Solomon Islands. And then the other answer they gave to me was they were there to look after the issues with the Chinese people in Honia. So I haven't seen any other province having some issues with Chinese people, except for Malaysia. So in saying that, automatically they say they come to look at Malaysia, because the Malaitans are the ones always come up strongly when there's something not right. So when they say that they come to look after the normal things that affects the Chinese in Money, automatically they're saying they are coming to look at you and your people in Malta because you are the ones who always come up very strong. So with the whole scheme of things, they are there for infrastructure, and one of them is logging. And if you go to logging camps, you will see that you must be very careful because you never know. They might have firearms or something, you don't know. These ships come all the way from China right into the logging camps.
So just to clarify, so the government has not released, even at your request, the final draft of the agreement. So what we've seen is the leaked draft, which we've been told is similar to what was finally signed. And that leaked draft says that essentially, a whole range of CC or Chinese forces, functionally, including the PLA, can be invited in by the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands for maintaining social order and protecting Chinese citizens and Chinese major projects.
And one of the things I personally, this is a personal thing, when foreign dignitaries asked the current Prime Minister about whether there will be a military presence of some sort by the Chinese in the Solomons, he always said that would not be happening. But for me personally, having been there and observing the decisions that he made against what he has said to the foreigners, I would hesitate to believe him. That, like he was saying, oh, we'll make the decision for switch after this, after Toro. And even he promised Mike Pence, the vice president during Donald Trump's time, to come to Washington before he made the switch. He ended up making the switch, but he promised Mike Pence already. So for me, those decisions of his, he made after promising people, and then he's not owning up to those things that he made. For me, it gives a personal, he has a personality of promising things, but they're not living up to it. So why should I believe him now about this military presence, whilst he was not telling the truth in other incidents that have happened?
So very quickly, just want to also touch upon. So we've heard all of this challenges and problems that both of you have been facing. So I'm curious, the two things, the current environment of the Solomon Islands, what is your plan to fight for democracy advancement and the freedom of speech in the country? And I think this question probably arose in the minds of many people here and beyond. What drove you to take this stance, a stance that really costed you your own security, your career, the safety of your family members? What drove you to take this strong stance?
I'll start and just contributing after. For me and my government during that time, we have seen these things coming. Like the people back in the province of Mali that will depend entirely on the resources that they live with, and they hope that the generation of their children will become, that's for them in the future. But knowing the fast influence of the companies that came to Mali, it's going to be very destructive if we are not going to be very careful about the decisions we make as a provincial government to the people. And just recently here in Washington, I've heard the weakest, the way we've been there, hearing them saying something. That is exactly what is happening in the Solomon Islands right now. They come in the name of development. We will be doing this. This is a win-win situation. You people will know this is the infrastructure for the sports over the generation of your country. And just recently, I've seen them going to the communities at home, and they acted as the culture of Mali that belongs to them. So they start giving, instead of people in Mali that are happy, giving them the present, they give the present in Mali the form of culture back to the Malitans. So what I've seen is that they're trying to get into the culture, the customs, and the norms in the place. In Guadalcanal, the same. When they go to the gold rich mining, I've seen the Chinese people giving the Guadalcanal sort of sell money. They gave to Sobovare. It's funny. Yeah. Like the Chinese people getting a culture from Guadalcanal and putting this, they present it to a real Solomon Island. So these things also I've heard from the Uyghurs. That's how they begin. So this is very concerning. This confirms what we are so concerned about in the Solomon Islands. And if we are not careful, this will you just imagine within 2 years and things change very quickly. And I was thinking that when the handing over of the stadium will give them the very impact to the people of Solomon Islands. Look, this is the first project for you. And then here comes another. And then people will say, okay, the government will remain, extend the date for next time. Don't do the election because they are doing good. So this is where we need the people, we share the same common values and the principle of what we belong to help one way or the other.
Mr. Talafilu?
So I basically feel that it's all about the values. What we have seen so far in Honiara, where the trading center or the economics of Honiara is totally run by the Chinese. And how they deal with things in getting the land, getting these things, it's very obvious that they have not done it in a proper way. You would see them quickly go to the Ministry of Lands, make the transfer quickly to get the land. So, and in Honiara, they have been expanding their presence there. That would affect, if we are not careful in Malaita, they will affect the same thing too. So it's important for us to stand strong and ensure the institutions of the state that are responsible in dealing with our affairs with the foreigners need to be, looked at so that they are strengthened, so that what has to be protected for the Solomon Island has to be protected. But at the moment, it's very weak, in my view, that needs proper legislations or amendments to the laws that regards to this natural resource extraction, things like fisheries, and things like that, so that if there is an engagement between, the people who come and do their business, it has to be happen under legislations that have strength to protect us. But essentially, it's about the values. Although these things happening in the Solomons and other parts of the world, I still have the hope, especially in my view, so far the Chinese are finding it quite difficult to sell their systems to other places. They have not been good at that. Whereas like in the Pacific, it's all been democratic countries. Although there are failures within the system, but the system is still there, allowing them to participate. So that's an area I feel that the mature democracies need to participate in that, to amplify that this system is better than the other, because it still allow yourself to participate as human beings, your values, your traditions is still acceptable, whereas the other system, that might be true. So my message to the mature democracies is it's time not to participate only government to government. There are avenues to participate in other arrangements like maybe churches, NGOs, that makes the people realize that this system is bigger than just the government. It belongs to the people at large.
Thank you so much. Well, just to wrap it up, I think we need to also let everyone know that these two gentlemen, because of the brave stances that they have taken, their security is potentially at stake, and they're still willing to go back to the Solomon Islands and to really fight for their homeland. I think this question maybe more for Cleo. What do you think us, the outside world, can do to support folks like the individuals that we have today, but also at the same time, the struggling people of the Solomon Islands and elsewhere.
So first of all, I'd like to thank the Press Club for having this, because this is exactly what's needed to do both of those things. This fight, as you've heard, this is a remarkable fight at the extreme front edge of the political warfare battle. So, you know, denial of medical care to a premier, disqualification from the seat from the One China policy, the postponement of an election using Chinese slush fund to buy 39 of the 50 members of parliament. These are all stories that you would expect to see covered on the front pages of well, a lot of newspapers around the world, but many people haven't heard the story. In part because there's been a sort of delegation in the Western world, at least to Australia and New Zealand, to cover this, and that hasn't happened. We can talk about why offline, but the fact that the Press Club has given this venue has bypassed that information blockage and allowed you to hear directly from the people themselves is incredibly important. The Diplomat, who I write for, just ran a piece recently about Mr. Soudani without interviewing Mr. Soudani and talking about how you know, he's being used as a tool by right-wing Americans in their China proxy war without listening to what's happening to him and reporting the situation on the ground. So this is incredibly important. Just this event and the reception they've received in DC has been remarkable. That Congress, the meetings with Congress, with congressional staffers, testifying before the committee, the commission, to be specific. They're speaking at a range of think tanks, all of that. But as they've both said, they're on the front line, but what they're fighting for is something that is bigger than any of us, which is the idea of democracy and the idea of how important it is. And they come from a country where their election has just been stolen. And unless they have an election, none of this can change. So the top line is Solomon Islands needs a free and fair election with international monitors and a guarantee of a peaceful transition of power. Unless that happens, we know what this trajectory leads to. And to facilitate that, the second part of it is we have to go after the dirty money. So China makes this happen through huge bribes. And when you talk about a competition of systems, the system of accountability, transparency, human rights, all that stuff, just it works better. It wins on a level playing field, but the playing field is not level because the corruption isn't punished. So there is no downside to taking Chinese money. If you're a Solomon Islands member of parliament and you get an envelope with $50,000, there's no downside to it. You're not there. Nobody's going to throw you in jail. Nobody's going to take away your money. And in fact, it's going to probably help you get reelected next time. There's a whole logic to it. So until we start to impose cost for taking Chinese money, nothing will change. And a lot of that money that goes to Prime Minister Sogavare, that clique, all those guys, gets funneled through the West because they don't want beachfront property in Shanghai. They want a beachfront property in Australia. So if the Australians started to take a look at disproportionate asset cases like the UK has done or like other countries have done, then the situation might start to change. So and then you say, if you're found guilty of corruption, you can't get a visa to countries that believe in democracy and freedom and not selling your country. So you go after the dirty money and you ensure that there's an election. Those are linked and they're essential. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up our event. But before we officially conclude, I'd like to personally just thank everyone who was involved. First and foremost, our great team, especially Poonam Sharma of the Strat Global Strategies, been gracious enough to host us in this wonderful institution, and also our great team at China Uncensored, Chris Chappell, Macanesa, and Shelley Jang. Thank the China Uncensored Army, great subscribers and loyal fans of these amazing individuals at China Uncensored. We'd like to thank all of you. This is all done largely because of everyone just pitching in. In a sense, it's wonderful to see that this grassroots movement has really picked up, all under the name of fighting for freedom in a land that is quite far from us. But in a sense, as you said, at the end of the day, you will also find great many friends who will care about our friends at the Solomon Islands and everyone who's impacted by this evil regime. We're also very glad to have the Congressional Executive Commission on China to have covered this. Again, special thanks to Mr. Piero Tozzi and Representative Chris Smith's office for really making that happen. And a great thanks to Representative Radwagen, especially, as well as Representative Neil Dunn, who both made time, and Representative Ed Case, of course, apologize, who all have banded together in a bipartisan way and really made a statement that there will be Americans who are going to honor all those who have sacrificed the Battle of Guadalcanal, and we will also honor the spirit of the unity that still exists between the two peoples. Lastly, we would also like to thank the Uyghur community for really making the time to meet with these gentlemen and to share some of the pain. And it was, I guess these both gentlemen were especially impacted by the stories of Ms. Calvin Ergeni and Ms. Tursunay Zeldin, Subi Mehmet, who was also there, and Surya, who all shared the plight of their families, and just also to show how the ways of the CCP is truly spreading across the world. So I'd like to thank everyone who was involved, and please pray and to please wish the safeties of these two gentlemen as much as possible, right? Your congressmen, all types of representatives that might be there. So this doesn't only impact those who are living in the States, but abroad as well. So before we end, I think we have a bit of a small, I guess, a traditional ceremony by the National Press Club.
To thank our distinguished guests for coming today and sharing their story. We have a little tradition at the Press Club that we give our guests and speakers the National Press Club mug.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you.
That concludes our program today. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you all help in raising awareness to this issue that needs to be covered more widely, because an assault on freedom and democracy anywhere is an assault on freedom and democracy everywhere. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.